Welcome to Husky Insider Talk. I'm your host, Chris Algard, with your front row seat to all the thrilling action, stories, and exclusive interviews from Bloomsburg University Athletics. Welcome into the second episode of Husky Insider Talk. I'm with Bloomsburg football head coach Frank Sheptock. Welcome.
Thank you, Christopher.
So we've got a good list of questions here, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the football season. First, introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself.
Frank Sheptock. I'm a 1986 graduate of Bloomsburg. Very proud Husky. Bloomsburg really had a tremendous influence on my life. Coach Landis was a new head coach at the time, and was fortunate enough to be his first recruit. The program wasn't in the best shape, right? I guess that's probably the nicest way to say it. But a lot of guys came in, worked real hard, and we had a great experience here, and really fell in love with Bloomsburg. Was a management major, and then my advisor, Dr. Bear, talked me out of that, got me into accounting. And afterwards, worked in the business world a little bit, but the experience that I had here with Coach Landis, Coach Maranzana, Coach Smeltz, tremendous impact on how you should be a young man and how to make decisions and those types of things that, really wanted to get into coaching. And Joe DeMelfi, who was the, offensive line coach at the time, he was fortunate enough to become the head coach at Wilkes and gave me an opportunity, which got me into this field. Could be forever grateful for Coach DeMelfi. But again, it was that kind of team where there was so many close bonds. And even today, Christopher, as we were talking before the show, I'm going to be with 2/3 of the recruiting class in a couple months, down at the beach. It's just, it's a neat experience, and that's why I've always wanted to come back to Bloomsburg, because it was such a special place for me. Family guy, there's no doubt about that. Lisa, my wife, and I have been together for a long time. We went to school here, graduated here together. 2 beautiful daughters, 2 beautiful grandboys. Very much a believer of nurturing family and bringing those type of ingredients into the team aspect, and very much looking forward to spending some time with you today.
So what really drove your love for football? Did it always start as a kid, or was it something you picked up?
Yeah, I remember the Coltmont Cougars, which was the midget team where I grew up. Talking to the head coach, telling him I lost my mom told me that I could go and tell him that I lost my birth certificate because I wasn't old enough, but I wanted to play so much to be on the team. And for whatever reason, as young as I can remember, grew up in Coltmont, proud 2,500 people in the borough of Coltmont, but we had Tim's Lot there, and we were playing football all the time, and then had the fortunate experience to play with the winningest high school coach in the state of Pennsylvania at that time, Jazz Dimnick, at Mount Carmel High School. And if you were in, the Mount Carmel area, football was king. Funny story, Christopher, that my grandfather, who I still adore to this day, he was a big catcher in baseball, and so you had to play baseball and you had to be a catcher. And I did that all through Little League and Senior League. And then as I was getting into high school, first time I met Coach Dimnick, I said, "Hi, Coach, I'm Frank Sheptock." And he's like, "I understand that you're signed up for baseball." And I said, "That's correct." I said it all proud. And he said, "Well, as a football player, you run track." And I said, "Very good." And I went and quit baseball. Was on the track team the next day. So, anything that I could do to play it more and try to do everything that I could. And again, I think it's the game itself, but it's more than about that for me. It was always the team portion and things that are sort of servant leadership, where you just get introduced to those types of things, because you got to think about the group and you got to think what's best for everyone as opposed to just yourself. And and then you throw in some of the things strategically, and a lot going on from that standpoint, Christopher. For me, And then, you know, like obviously the physical part of, that was something that like I enjoyed a great deal.
Well, the Red Tornadoes, they take their football at a whole nother level, still
There's
do.
no doubt.
They take a lot of pride in, obviously you took a lot of pride in football all the way from a young age, and you've had one awesome career, and it took you a long way, a Hall of Fame career, and a matter of fact of that, a college Hall of Famer here with me. How much does that mean to you to be in a select group of college Hall of Famers, one of them being one of the greatest coaches in Bloomsburg history with Danny Hale?
Yeah. It's extremely humbling because when you think about the amount of people that have played, college football, and then like you're talked about in that same realm, like it's extremely humbling because like to me, again, like I just think that I was a fortunate person to be around good people. And like I talk with our guys today, Christopher, at length about, you're around good people, the quality of your life is going to be better. And I think it's a direct reflection of that because, whether it was, guys in front of me, next to me, behind me, they were all, very hardworking, committed. And, like I was just, and I still think this, I was fortunate enough, to be the one that was recognized. But it could have been any of those guys. And, I really look at it that way. And, but it's extremely humbling, when you're at the College Football Hall of Fame and they talk about the, the amount of people that played. And, so that really puts it in perspective. And obviously I think the, the ultimate honor, and that's why, again, where like I just feel like there's I got to give back to the game. It's given me so much and has, created, some neat things for my family and I, but obviously I still value the most of like, being in a locker room with your teammates and your friends and you're doing things together to try to accomplish something, but from a humbling standpoint as an athlete, being inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, boy, it's really even hard to put in words, that a young man from Coltmont, Pennsylvania, who played for Jazz at Mount Carmel, and then George Landis gave an opportunity to, come here to Bloomsburg, and, we go from, my first year we were 1-7-1, and I think the team was 0-11, and then, 3 years later we're in the national semifinals. It was a heck of a run, and, we just feel extremely blessed to be a part of that.
We'll move into the second round of questions now. What is one word that you would use to describe yourself?
Driven. Because again, like I got like that tunnel vision again. Like once I want to accomplish it, I'm gonna like try to work hard, and like again, like I can find motivation in the things that are important to me. And again, like I was gonna say work ethic, but that would have been too. But the driven part that like I think that like as you try to figure out what you want your goals to be, that you're willing to work at the level to accomplish it. And it's not like a hope, like you're going to do everything that you can. And again, like I believe like I've used certain phrases for myself growing up about like work ethic and those types of things that drive you, and still very much believe those things, and about overcoming adversity, and because again, like I think the resiliency part, of being driven, of that, like you keep going no matter what, and I try to get that across to the players, and because again I think that's something that transcends for them, past football, about like you want something, this is what you need to do to get it. And we were just in we had Kent Smeltz, who was the outside linebacker coach with me when I was here. He was visiting last week with some of the student athletes and scholarship recipients that like he sponsors, and he talked about that like after he got his graduate degree here, he had to compete versus major companies, in the field that he was in, and it was about working hard. And that's what like he had brought to this program about like this is what you need to do. And and I think work ethic is a skill, and being driven is like like you got to be that every day, so like you got to live it. So just thought that was something that like hey, maybe I wasn't the most talented person in the room, maybe I wasn't the fastest, maybe I wasn't the biggest, but like I was gonna try to work as hard as I could.
Who is your favorite athlete and why?
Well, are we talking now, or are we talking? So like when I was younger as a linebacker, like I really liked Jack Lambert because I just thought he was like a dude. I mean, like he intimidated people and he had this presence on the field. And then I also had a great passion for Lawrence Taylor because he was the bar, from a linebacker standpoint. So, definitely have a great appreciation for what they brought to the game and how they went about things. Totally different players, but definitely qualities that like I could see myself trying to be like, and hoping that I would try to be like, and then I was a Dallas Cowboy fan growing up, so. Roger Staubach and Tony Dorsett and Billy Joe Dupree, and I could go through that whole roster. Leroy Jordan, and there was Bob Lilly. There was a lot of neat guys that I just enjoyed watching.
Are you still a Cowboys fan? Is the real question.
Well, I became a little bit more of a Steeler fan, as I like Mike Tomlin. So when I got into coaching, it went from liking players to liking coaches, and I liked Mike Tomlin. So I became a little bit more of a Steeler fan, but boy, you could really cause some rivalry issues here because Coach Sirianni's younger brother worked for me at Wilkes for a while, so obviously I've got a soft spot in my heart for the Eagles because of the closeness with the Sirianni family. And then I know that's not going to bode real well with the Dallas people, but that's just the reality of it.
Now onto the football season, and we talked about it a little bit before we started this. What do you think is the expectation around your locker room and around your team that you strive to put forward?
Like when I came back, our goal is to make a run at a national title, and I think before you do that, Christopher, we've got to get back to being able to win the East. So I think that's the number one objective. As we look at things. And right now, the big dog in the room in the East is Kutztown from a football standpoint. East Stroudsburg has done very well, and Shepherd's had a couple runs as well. But Kutztown has been the most consistent. So you talk about hey, to get where you want to get, who do you have to beat? And I think that it was like that. Again, I can relate to that when I was a player. East Stroudsburg was they were the team. And you have to be able to raise your level and try to say, hey, these are some of the things that we need to do to win at this particular level. And at each particular, and I would think each particular program has those one or two teams, that they feel that they have to raise their game, to be able to get there from that particular standpoint. So I think it's very well understood in our locker room about, we'll still have to be the best version of ourselves. But as you're competing, you have to say, we have to be good at these certain things to win at the level that we want to win at. And you try to break it down for the players, in the most simplistic way that you can, of whether it's, hey, we got to be better in the C-gap run, or we got to be better at, less yards after contact from a tackling standpoint, or we need to have, more takeaways. We need to have more, on a scoring rate at a higher level of the amount of drives that we have. So you're able to put it in easy terms for them, to be able to accomplish their goals. Because I think as young men and young women, it's about breaking it down so that they could see, hey, we can do this. Because it's really when again, for me in my locker room, I'm thinking, I'm going to have an optimistic approach where they believe in the fact that we can be successful. And when you have optimism and you have that belief that the success is, very much if they communicate and collaborate, you got a great opportunity. And I think that, like, for us right now, everybody's been very pleased with the progress that we've made, over the last couple of years. And now we're ready we feel like, hey, like we're ready to put our best foot forward. And again, I think our players expect that because we've been working so hard for it. But you work hard for it, but everybody else is too. So now you got to go out and, perform when you need to perform at the highest levels. And that as an athlete, it's, everybody wants to do well, but it's at that moment, can you make the play? And I think that's what we're trying to raise the bar and rise to the occasion, in our program.
What was the big standout in the spring so far? You had the spring game a couple weeks ago. You had all your spring workouts. What was the biggest standout to you about that will lead you into next season?
I think the consistency of our energy and our effort, because like obviously the spring game and practice, you see some of the results of how things are moving along, but sometimes what you don't see, Christopher, is hey, the 6 a.m. workouts and being down in the weight room and grinding and back to the being driven part where, like, I was super pleased with the effort and energy that we had on a day in, day out basis, like in those workouts. And, whether it was myself or maybe it was somebody from, like Coach Four in his room about, what's going on in the strength room or what's going on when he's working with our kids and their ability to accelerate better, or what, the athletic training staff is saying about our group. There was a very consistent message of that. Hey, this group is doing these things, and I thought it carried over through the spring where we had a very competitive spring. And again, but the optimism, the belief, that we can be successful. I think, we've got a great foundation laid for that because, like, it's a proven thing. The kids, the players can see it in, hey, I'm a little faster, I'm a little bigger, I'm a little bit more explosive, I could jump a little higher. Like, those things that are measurable, I think really reinforce, the hard work that they've put in, and then that gives them a little bit more belief in themselves as well as their teammates. And then as they look around, again, we had a tremendous recruiting class. So I think that speaks volumes of how our program is being received, in the areas that we recruit, because like we felt like that we got our top guy at every position, so felt really good about that. So the team is being built from the ground up. The guys have really bought into that part, and that, the being driven and the part about, again, hanging in there and overcoming some adversity. And I thought we learned a lot last year because we went through some, emotional roller coasters of, losing at the end of the Seton Hill game with, 7 seconds to go, and, and then going down to Shepherd and, missing a field goal at the end, but finding a way to win in the second overtime, that I thought, like, our kids started to show a lot of, character and that drive coming out. And I thought that really, even though, like, again, we were playing our tails off out there at Slippery Rock, and it didn't go our way, but, took us with some momentum into the off season, and the kids really rode that momentum, through the winter and the spring. So couldn't be more pleased from that standpoint.
I know you're certainly excited. I'm definitely excited for this year. So that's all we've got here for episode 2 of Husky Insider Talk. We thank Bloomsburg head coach Frank Sheptock for joining us today.
Appreciate it, Christopher.
That's all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in to Husky Insider Talk. I'm your host, Chris Algard, with your front row seat to all the thrilling action, stories, and exclusive interviews from Bloomsburg University Athletics.